In general, African civilization hasn't gotten as much attention as others on a global scale, but when the topic does come up, we tend to hear more about Egypt, Mali, or perhaps the Swahili city-states. When it comes to powerful African kingdoms, we often measure their value by popularity or proximity to other nations outside of Africa. So today, I wanted to take the time to discuss 5 underrated African civilizations that were very powerful and that we should all know more about. What up, African world? It's Home Team here, and welcome back to another video of African history, culture, and worldview. And as always, if you want to support the Home Team, you can do so on patreon.com. I have some new rewards for you guys, so be sure to check that out. Also, go to Afrographics.com, a website where you can find unique illustrative infographics summarizing African history. All links to Patreon, Afrographics, and Home Team merchandise are in the description box below. Now, of course, everyone isn't going to agree with this list, and that's okay, because I think it'll be a great way to actually have this discussion in the comment section and highlight other underrated African civilizations. So please, share your thoughts about your opinion below. Our first underrated African civilization is the Yoruba Kingdom of Oyo. Along with the Mali Empire, the Yoruba kingdoms also had a major influence on the developments of West African history. Traditionally, the home of the Yoruba people is regarded as being the city of Ile-Ife, especially since it was the oldest Yoruba city. However, by 1300, Ile-Ife had reached its peak and a new Yoruba city was beginning to take over. By 1400, Oyo, which was farther to the north at the margins of the forest and savanna, became the dominant commercial and political city of the Yoruba people. Oyo began to rise as a major power after the leadership adopted the use of cavalry as the foundation of their army. This change meant that Oyo would always be dependent on routes from the north for a fresh supply of horses because Oyo was too far south for the successful breeding of large horses that were suitable for battle. Regardless, Oyo's claim to fame was the dominance of its cavalry army that gave them a tremendous advantage over other Africans in the region, even though they were limited in some regions further south. The political system of Oyo was at once arranged with checks and balances, but it was also quite hierarchical and was designed to maintain power within the hands of the Oyo elite. At the head of the system was the Alafin, or king. In addition to the Alafin, there was a council known as the Oyo Messi that was headed by an official known as the Ajuran. The king was very powerful and was considered to be a demigod by the general population. However, the Oyo Messi had the right to command the king to commit suicide if they deemed him unfit for office. Within the Oyo Messi, there was also a secret society known as the Ogboni that was also at the center of struggles for power within Oyo. Apparently, Oyo began to expand in the 16th century in response to an invasion by the Nupe in 1531, which destroyed the city. The leaders of Oyo would eventually inflict serious defeats upon the Nupe, while also making the northern Yoruba town of Olorin part of the Oyo Empire. Eventually, Oyo controlled territory spreading from the Niger River in what is now Nigeria all the way to present-day Togo. Oyo in their prime became a very powerful kingdom and became feared by other African ethnic groups in their proximity. Our next underrated African civilization are the Hausa city-states. The Hausa city-states are at the center of various legends and historic figures who led many conquests, the most popular perhaps being Queen Amina of Zaria. The Hausa states were found between the Niger River and Lake Chad, between the Kingdom of Bornu and Mali. Immigration and conquest mark Hausa history, and the Hausa themselves are a conglomerate of a number of different people who have been incorporated into the original stock largely through conquest. Hausa tradition proclaims that there are 7 true Hausa states, the Hausa Bakwai, and 7 derived or illegitimate states, the Hausa Banza. Tradition further states that all Hausa people derive from the Hausa Bakwai, the true 7 states. The city-state of Dara, founded by a woman named Dara, is the senior city among the Hausa states. The 7 true Hausa city-states are Dara, Katsina, Zazau, Gobir, Kano, Rano, and Biram. What is known is that the seven kingdoms resulted from a mixture of newly arrived foreigners and local people because of urbanization in northern Nigeria. Capital cities became centers of power and rule. These new cities were walled and fortified and marked the rise of kingship in the region. Over time, these kings controlled trade in the region along the Niger River in what became northern Nigeria. The rulers turned to Islam to aid their government organization. The Hausa states specialized in various crafts and trade goods. Kano, for example, was known for its dyed cotton fabrics and so-called Moroccan leather. The walled towns of the Hausa enabled them to resist various enemies and protect their control of much of the trans-Saharan trade. Katsina and Kano became centers of caravan routes. Hausa traders established Sabon Gari, or strangers' quarters, all over Nigeria. These strangers' quarters helped the Hausa to set up efficient trade networks, securing access to markets in other parts of West Africa, which ultimately increased their wealth, influence, and power. The Hausa oversaw the flowering of a powerful culture whose height was established in about the middle of the 17th century. The next underrated African civilization is the Songhai Kingdom of Gao. The origins of the Songhai Empire are intimately linked with the fortunes of Gao, its capital city. But before Gao was its capital, it was once a kingdom in and of itself. Ibn Battuta visited Gao in 1353, and this is what he had to say about the city during that time. Then I traveled to the town of Kaukau, which is a great town on the Niger, one of the finest, biggest, and most fertile cities of the Sudan. There is much rice there, and milk, and chickens, and fish, and the cucumber, which has no like. Its people conduct their buying and selling with cowries, like the people of Mali. According to local historical sources, the Tariq-es-Sudan and Tariq-el-Fatash, the Proto-Songhai people left their homelands in the Bentia, Kukuya region, south of Gao, and traveled north, establishing a settlement in the vicinity of Gao in about 690 AD. However, archaeological research has indicated that the area around Gao has been almost continuously occupied since the late Stone Age. Following the foundation of the city, it rapidly grew in size and prosperity. This affluence was based upon trade. Starting in the late 8th or early 9th century, these local trade networks were supplemented by trans-Saharan trade routes directed to North Africa, but indirectly continuing much farther within the Muslim world and beyond. Local trade was in commodities such as foodstuffs, pottery, beads, copper, and iron. Trans-Saharan trade predominantly followed a pattern in which finished items were imported from the north and raw materials were exported from the south. Both the Arab historical sources and the archaeological evidence indicate the importance of trade to the inhabitants of Gao. Glazed ceramics from Spain, Egypt, and Tunisia were carried south by a camel caravan, along with glass vessels and semi-precious stone beads, items of metalwork, cloth, paper, cowrie shells, and spices. Gao also benefited from control of the salt trade. Salt was mined in the Sahara, sent to centers such as Gao, and from there was traded onward throughout the savanna and forest zones to the south. The importance of the trade in salt to the inhabitants of Gao is indicated by an observation recorded by the Arab historian Yaqut. Writing in the early 13th century, he noted that the king's treasure houses are spacious, his treasure consisting principally of salt. That may sound strange to some of you, but salt was a very precious item back then, because it not only enhanced your food, but it also helped to preserve meat, which was very important. By the late 11th century, Gao had developed into a major urban center and was composed of a variety of different quarters. Archaeological research has uncovered parts of the old city of Gao, which was found to contain buildings constructed out of fired brick, finished with colored plaster, with the whole area surrounded by an enclosing dry stone wall. Archaeologists also discovered the remains of a royal cemetery dating to the 12th century, which contained carved tombstones imported all the way from Spain. Until the mid-13th century, Gao was an independent Songhai kingdom ruled by the Za or Dia dynasty. Even though Gao struggled to maintain its independence from the more powerful Mali, the kingdom proved itself to be a legitimate rival to one of the greatest empires in West Africa, as it eventually broke away and formed the foundation for the growing Songhai Empire. Next on our list of underrated African civilizations, we have the Ajuran Empire. Surprisingly, not much is known about the origin or the administration of the Ajuran Sultanate. What we do know seems to come largely from Somali achievements that simply could not be ignored by the world. The Ajuran Sultanate emerged in southern Somalia and became the largest and longest standing state that continued for about 300 years from the 14th to 17th century. The little available records depict that the Sultanate was headquartered in Merka, applied Islamic Sharia, established a strong standing army, and gave priority to building water supplies and building fortifications. The Ajuran Sultanate is credited with defending the Somali territory from the Oromo and Portuguese raids and spreading Islam across the whole region. This, of course, being a gigantic feat, because the Somali Empire of Ajuran were the only East Africans to defeat a European force on the sea. The Portuguese tried to flex their muscles by sailing and taking the city of Mogadishu, which was one of the wealthiest cities in Africa at the time. A naval battle ensued, and a Somali-Ottoman alliance drove the Portuguese from key cities along the African coast. The Ajuran-Portuguese Wars was one of the first naval battles between an African navy and a European one, and the political acumen and naval prowess of the Somali drove them to victory. And finally, our last underrated African civilization is the Kingdom of Kush. Kushite civilization has gone through many stages, such as the Napata period and its extension into Egypt, popularly known as the 25th dynasty of Egypt. But I wanted to focus on a lesser highlighted part of Kushite history. After the fall of the Kushite Empire, their base in Merowe was still very powerful. No military outside of Africa was ever able to conquer Kush during any period, and that's something that needs to be highlighted. The wealth of Merowe was centered around a strong iron industry, as well as international trade involving India and China. A new indigenous alphabet called Meroitic, consisting of 23 letters, replaced Egyptian script, and this affirmed Kushite power in the region. During the mid-3rd and 2nd centuries BC, an area in the heart of the city was constructed in Merowe, which consisted of an enclosed thick stone wall with projecting towers. It was called the Royal City by its excavator. Within this area were temples, palaces, and royal baths, which functioned as a water sanctuary probably connected with festivals performed by the king on the occasion of the beginning of the annual inundation. After the rule of King Arkamani, there was a line of warrior queens from Merowe called Kandaki. They were known as warrior queens because they actually participated in battle, the greatest of them being Queen Amanirenas. Queen Amanirenas had a brief war with Rome, which ended in a strategic withdrawal from the Romans and the queen maintaining the sovereignty of Merowe. Well, I'm all out, guys. I hope you enjoyed the list and learned something you may not have known. And if you'd like to support the home team, you can do so on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. Know thyself. Remember your ancestors. Peace.